Alright, so this is the third section of video notes. This is continuing on social psychology. This is the reading on social relations. Since this reading is so large, I did break it into two parts. So this is video, this is technically the third video that you're watching, but it's part one of social relations. The information can be found in your note packets, and it also can be found in the book on page 664 to 678. Okay, so social relations, exploring how people relate to one another. Okay, so this section's broken apart into two parts. The first thing I'm going to talk about is prejudice. The second thing I'm going to talk about is aggression. So we'll start off here with prejudice. We'll talk about what prejudice means, how prejudice includes stereotyping, using discrimination. We'll talk about in-group, out-group. We'll talk about in-group bias, scapegoating, other race effect, and just world phenomenon. So talking about prejudice. Prejudice means prejudgment. It's usually a negative attitude towards a group, often somebody from a different culture, ethnic, or gender group. Prejudice is the mixture. So being prejudiced includes using stereotypes, being emotionally maybe hostile, envy, fearful of a certain person, and it's using your predispositions to action. So once you do the action on somebody, that's known as discriminating. Okay, so here's kind of the breakdown again, the three components of prejudice. Prejudice is the negative attitude where you could have beliefs. Okay, you could have a prejudiced belief against somebody, so that's like a stereotype or a judgment. Okay, so your prejudice may be something like you really don't like redheaded people. Okay, so your stereotype towards redheaded people is redheaded people are thieves. Okay, when you see redheaded people, you can become emotionally angry or jealous at them. Okay, and it upsets you emotionally. And then the last one is then you're going to start discriminating against them, which this is the action where you don't let them into your restaurant or you won't hire them for a job. So the action is actually to discriminate. So prejudice is just the attitude and discrimination is the action. Okay, so prejudice is going to include kind of your prejudgment on this issue. Okay, prejudice is a mixture of stereotypes, predispositions to discrimination, and emotions. Always a negative attitude. Stereotype is just the belief. Okay, so you're just having a belief towards somebody. And discrimination is the negative action. So prejudice takes into consideration all of it. Okay. How prejudiced are people? They talked a little bit about this in the textbook. The levels of prejudice can change. 1937, 35% of people would vote for women as president. Closer to today's time period, 2007, 89% said they would vote for women. Okay, so that's just showing you that prejudice about certain things can change. It does take a while, but we do see the shifting beginning to happen. Some people argue that overt prejudice, okay, wanes, and they might say they support it, so that's like they say they support gay marriage, but then subtle prejudice still lingers. So cognitively, there's still prejudice. So we're kind of like, we show it. So we're showy, like, yeah, I support something. That's the overt. However, internally, we really don't. Okay. Why does prejudice rise? It's going to talk a little bit about why does prejudice happen. One is inequality. Two is because there's a social division. And three, because the emotional scapegoating that takes place. Okay, so social inequality, the amount of money and opportunity of a certain group of individuals causes inequality and causes prejudice to still occur. Okay, discrimination can also increase stereotyping and prejudice through the interaction. So there are some groups in society that are more wealthy than others. They're going to perpetuate this prejudice cycle. Okay, you also have in-groups, out-groups. Okay, groups, as species, we are formulate, and we like to formulate amongst groups. we select a lot of times people who are similar to us. Our in-group is the circle that really defines you. This is what you believe you are part of. The out-group is the outside group, so the outsiders. So I always think of Mean Girls when they do this. They really describe all the people that are in the in-groups at the different lunch tables. Right? And then the out-group is anybody that's not in their group. Right? In-group bias is usually you favor your group. So it's an in-group bias. Okay, the emotional impact and how it continues to cause prejudice to take place. Scapegoating is you need to find somebody to blame for a situation. Okay, you need to blame an innocent person for one's own troubles. So let's say you're really happy about how your neighborhood is changing and that all these places are shutting down. You need to find somebody to blame for that issue, so you're going to point your finger at somebody. And you usually want to point somebody that's different than you. Jewish people during the Nazi time period were scapegoated for the, obviously, World War One. Right, September 11th, many Americans started lashing out at Arab Americans, even though there were many Arab Americans that never that lost a lot of people themselves, and they didn't support what was taking place at this point in time. So people were very stereotypical towards this group of people and scapegoated them. Cognitive roots of prejudice. This is the thought process now. Categorization takes place. One phenomenon they do talk about is what's known as the other race effect. We supposedly have the ability to recognize our own race's face better than others. So if you are, let's say, a Hispanic, okay, you're going to have an easier time identifying people who have the same race as you, and you're going to believe that if you were to look at other Hispanics, there are various differences. Now, if you were looking at somebody from the Caucasian culture, let's say specifically from Ireland with the freckles and the red hair, you might assume, since you're of a different race, you might have assumed all redheads have freckles and all look very similar. Okay, so you usually believe that your race is very diverse, but other races look very similar to one another. Things that can impact our cognitive development that cause prejudice is usually a vivid case impacts your memory. So if there's a bad case about a certain race, or let's say gender, that's going to perpetuate how you think about that culture. So the tendency for violent cases to be more readily available in our memory and therefore influence our judgments made about a particular group. Okay, again, I'm using the Islamic culture because of what happened with September 11th. Many people thought that that was the right thing to, or the right people to blame for that situation, and many people who study the Islam faith are very different from the few that actually represented that culture. Just world phenomenon is the phenomenon in the thought process. So this is cognitive again, that people get what they deserve. The tendency for people to believe the world is just, and that if you get kind of the situation that you really deserve. Alright, so that was part one with prejudice. We talked about stereotypes, discrimination, in-group, out-group, in-group bias, scapegoating, other race effect, and just world phenomenon. And now I'm going to move on to aggression. Okay, so now moving on to the second part of this presentation, aggression. We talked about aggression before with emotion. Aggression can be, it's a way that we relate to others, right? Being aggressive. But some people believe it's the biopsychosocial can cause aggression. So you got your biological influences, you got your psychological thought process, and you got your social, the social impact that can tie into aggression. We're also going to talk about the frustration aggression principle that you should be knowledgeable about. Okay, first one, what is aggression? Is any physical or verbal behavior intended to hurt or destroy a certain situation. It can be planned or someone reaching out for a certain situation. Okay, the first part we're going to talk about is the biology of aggression. Genetics. Studies have found that there are many genetic markers found on those who continuously commit violent crimes. So a lot of the times they say that if you were somebody who was born from somebody who was very violent, you may have inherited some sort of gene, because there are genes that are found that are that aggressive gene. Neural messages, studies have found that when certain areas of the brain are stimulated with electrodes, aggression behavior can be inhibited or produced. So we've talked about that before. What can stimulate you to be more aggressive? That's mostly managed in the amygdala. And then biochemical, hormones, alcohol, and other substances can cause you to act out your aggressions, because there could be a biological, biochemistry, biochemical reaction that can cause you to be that way. You also have psychological and social factors. So let's talk first about the psychological factors. You have adverse events. Studies show that those who are miserable often make others miserable. So that thought process, I'm going to think this way, you're going to think that way. Frustration aggression principle is they state that frustration creates anger. So when you're frustrated, it's going to create you to be angry, which may in some people create that aggression. Okay, so you're going to act out. So this is indicating that if you're more frustrated, you're going to be more aggressive. Sociocultural influences, our actions are more likely to be aggressive if we have experienced this aggression and is rewarded positively. So after you, say you get in a fight with somebody in the hallway, people all run up to you and are like, yeah, man, that's cool, that's cool. You're more prone to probably continue this aggressive behavior because you were rewarded for it. Okay, so I broke it down into prejudice and aggression. You should have a pretty strong grip on both of these factors, and I will see you on Monday.